Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who should have been the one to fill my dark soul with light.
Tim Longo. It should have been. You should have been
the one.
I wasn't. You
weren't.
I failed.
There was no light. No light was filled into any Dark Souls here.
No.
That's a little. Maybe this is where they got the name for Dark Souls. Okay, that's a tangent already. We're of course talking about Devil May Cry. That little quote there might be the epitome of the writing in this game, because it happens just before your final encounter. Well, your apparent final encounter with Mundus, because it's a Japanese game. You're going to, of course, have to fight him at least twice, because that's just the way that they work, right? You have to do that. You have to have a, oh no, actually he's not dead moment. And we have some of those, and we'll get to the sort of story moments. But in this particular case, so you've only gotten to the point where Trish betrays you.
Yes, I've seen that scene, and for the audience, I'm alluding to failing in that I did not finish the game in time for this episode, and fear that I will not. I think I'm going to move on with my life, and I just can't do it anymore. I feel like I've put in the time. I feel like I gave it my best. I've definitely spent, a couple hours on at least one of the bosses, or maybe hour and a half, and then that consistently happened for the last few bosses, just like big chunks of time. So, yep. But yeah, so the last story scene I saw was that betrayal in that second phase, or the last phase of that last nightmare. I assume the last nightmare.
Yes, that's the end of the nightmare. Yeah,
it's not the end of my nightmare. I'm still
not
having the nightmare.
I'm sure you are.
Still,
is that 20? Is that level 20?
20,
so 21
yeah.
must be mostly a traversal to get to Mundus. But then what basically happens at the end of that battle, so let's touch on the sort of story bits, because there's a lot more story at this point in a weird way.
We've gotten the second half of the amulet, so now we have the full amulet.
Correct.
From the final battle with turns out Sparda, Ghost of Sparda, whatever, but turns out it's Vergil, your brother.
Apparently. I'm not really sure how that's communicated. Not super well, because I didn't sort of even get that until we appeared before Mundus. Does he say that? And I just
so it's subtle. There's, when you pick up that amulet after you kill him, there's like a voiceover kind of memory where it's like your mother saying something about you and Vergil, and she gives you probably both pieces of the amulet.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So,
and now that's why you have both. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess I didn't read that super well. I do stream them, so there's definitely nuance that I miss.
Yeah. Totally.
Because I'm all amped up on the performance. Anyway, you defeat Nightmare. You finally get to the big throne room of Mundus, who's the enemy. After you beat Nightmare, he indicates, Mundus appears as like some glowing orbs and is like, you know what the price is now that you failed to defeat him, Trish, which you're given to believe is maybe her death or something, because another enemy was killed by Mundus when it failed to defeat you in the last session.
The bird.
Right, the bird. After its wings got ripped off and all of that stuff. It's like, pretty tough spot there to then, and then if you just given me a little power, I could have done it. Nope, sorry, you fail. You die.
Mm-hmm.
So you do show up in Mundus's throne room, and you confront him. He's enormous. He's gigantic. He's several stories tall. And Trish is actually crucified. It's like a huge cathedral room. She's crucified above the entrance, but high above, so you never see her until the story moment reveal of she's up there. But Mundus is about to blast you with some light that's going to kill you, apparently. And instead, Beatrice shoves you out of the way and takes it. So she sacrifices herself. Trish does.
Yeah.
For Dante. And then...
So what form is Mundus in when you say it's just a big...
He's
big
this
man?
enormous statue that looks like a man with like a third eye, but he looks just like a normal, just an enormous, like a god-sized figure, like Zeus sort of at the end of God of War or something like that, or Ares, I guess it is. Just huge, sitting on this throne, but like apparently a statue. And until he does this, and then of course all the statue bits break away, and you have this fight in this intergalactic void.
Of course.
Japanese.
Yep.
Game. And so you have this big fight where when you do your devil trigger, you turn into a flying dragon of flame that goes through his heart. So you want to keep using the devil trigger, which is what I did. I used a ton of devil trigger consumables in order to just keep pushing that up. You have that fight. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. There's some orbs that are protecting him. There's just a million things going on. It's basically Space Harrier or something like that in that section.
Oh wow! So the camera is consistent.
You're pulled back. You're flying through space. You're shooting. The controls are inverted in both directions.
What?
It was very difficult. And then I just started spamming the devil trigger, because if you get that up to full, it does a lot of damage. So I did that. Thanks to the stream for that help, because I would have never gotten through that on my own. I tried several times just doing it straight up, where you have to shoot these orbs, but he's got all these different defenses, and it was
sounds a little bit like swimming. Is it the swimming kind of controls?
No, it's not first person. It's still third person. And there's no shoot. Like when you shoot with the underwater controls, you can't move. Can't turn or anything, right? Here you're just moving around the screen, and all the firing is going in his direction. So you're not actually changing your orientation. You're literally like a 3D space game where you're moving around in the screen space, but the camera's not moving. So it's a weird thing. So you break that, you break through that version of him, and it takes you to another battle, where now you're on like a little spit of rock. And you're basically doing something a little bit similar, where you're shooting him from that ground spot where your fire button basically is. Your circle button is just shooting fireballs at him. And if you devil trigger, you do better. I guess no. If you devil trigger, you get to shoot the fireballs. Otherwise, you're just normal sword guy. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds like in these last two battles, the mechanics change quite a bit.
Pretty dramatically and pretty surprisingly. And frustratingly, I was not really happy with that change. And I spent a lot of time on the first phase of that battle. I only had gotten to the second phase like once or twice and got owned. And then people were like, you really just should just use up all these devil trigger things that you have, because you'll get right through it. And sure enough, doing that next time or so. So it just kind of blasted through it at that point.
How many did you have, out of curiosity?
I had 4. I had 3, I think, maybe, and then I bought 2 more.
Yeah.
At the mission store. At the end, we'll talk about the mission screens and all that stuff in a moment. So I did that, and I added I think I added a vital star as well. So I had a vital star. And I think I even at that point added a retry, just in case I got to that second part but didn't defeat it, that I would be able to just start from there. Because the first part was definitely more difficult.
Was that second part the last mission, or was there a mission break between those, or because there's 23?
No.
Okay.
No, this is mission 22.
Okay.
And I'll tell you about 23. So you defeat him. You go back to that cathedral, and Trish is there dead. And that's when you crumble down to your knees, you bend over her, you put your arms around her, and you say that you are the one who should have been able to fill her dark soul with light.
Okay.
Which is about as melodramatic a statement as has ever been made in a video game. And you let fly two devil's tears, I guess. and you leave the amulet on her. I believe you put the amulet on her. And then you have to escape the building before it all crumbles down around you. So you basically leave the amulet there on her. She reminds you of your mother, which is also a little weird. You go and you start running through the castle, like literally just running backwards through the castle at this point. And at a certain point,
regular camera,
all the cameras that we've had up to that point, and literally going back through spaces we've been through. And there's a timer. There's like a 5-minute timer, and you're going like, oh man, I don't know how we're possibly going to do this. You end up falling through the floor at some point because the building's coming down around you, and you land in that sewer room with all the pipes that lead into it.
Yeah, hate that area.
And that's when Trish shows back up, because of course your tears somehow revived her. And then she's there to help you as Mundus bursts through the wall.
Oh no.
So you have to fight another version of Mundus, which is like this grotesque, like extra eyeballs everywhere. And it's like his projection into the prime material plane or something. I don't really know. Defeating him that time was a lot easier. It's mostly just sword. It's a standard sort of sword at that time, sword fight. And then when that finishes, he like thrashes around, destroys the ceiling. The biplane falls through the floor into the room you're in. And so you both hop.
I knew
into
that
the
thing would
biplane.
come into play at some point.
You hop onto the biplane and you fly out.
Oh, shoot. Are you serious?
Yeah. So you fly out, and there's like this section where you're in these caves, and it's occasionally we'll just it'll invert and stuff like that, or it'll do a roll, a full 360 roll, barrel roll, and you fly through, and you have to shoot, but it's pretty easy this is not difficult, thankfully. You end up flying through that, and it's, and you burst out, and that's basically the game. It is something else. When that thing fell through the floor, I could not believe it. I started laughing. Like, this is amazing.
Yeah. I kept wondering because you go through that room so many times. It's like, why is this biplane here?
What is with this plane? Yes.
Little do we know. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good, I love that sort of thing. I love that. It was unexpected, and then it happened. I'm like, of course. And of course, we're going to hop right in it, and it's just going to start, and we're just going to go. This is pretty hilarious.
You could be making all of this up, and I would still believe you, because it just sounds so ridiculous. And
you never even got the eggplant.
No, I never got
that part. I'm making up.
Okay, yeah, the eggplant power up.
Yeah.
Well, the purple orbs look like an eggplant with a face.
Yeah, sure.
To some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm bummed that I'm not going to see that stuff. Maybe I'll watch some videos, but
you can go watch my stream.
Oh, that's true.
See
I
me
should
doing
it.
it. It'll be up for the next month or whatever. So you won't do that, but you should.
Yeah, maybe. I just, I don't know. Was this my fourth game that I didn't finish on the podcast, or third?
Yeah, that sounds right. Something like that. Third or fourth. Yeah. Neither one of us finished XCOM.
XCOM. Technically, I think Final Fantasy IX I didn't finish.
Well,
I finished, but I didn't really.
Yeah.
GTA I didn't finish.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. I forget something else, but yeah, I just hit that wall. But hearing you sort of retell the ending is almost more rewarding to me. Because it's just it's now I have a version in my head of how it actually went down based on your description, and so I'm adding in a bunch of fun little moments in interstitials. So none of that melodrama of the story surprises me, though.
No,
clearly on track with what I would expect, especially that line that you quoted.
Yep.
And Trish's, of course,
yes, literally
presence.
Literally on the stream when that happens, I say, "Oh, I guess I have my intro for this week."
Yeah, right.
I start typing on my PC, which is right there in front of me because it's in a cutscene.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, there was I didn't put a note down, but there was a line There was another line that I did see in this last session that I thought was really classic too. It might have been something he said to Vergil at the end or something, but yeah, they're just one-liners. I mean, the script overall is not long, and like I said last session, and it kind of sounds like even if I had finished, I think I still would have felt this way by the end. That there isn't a lot of story there. It's just plot and some pieces, right? But there's not really. There's not even a revenge.
There's character. The strength of the game is the character, I think, of Dante and sort of his coolness and all that stuff that we talked about. I'm sure that will come up in our sort of takeaways. But
sure.
But the rest of it is very. I think it leans pretty heavily on just sort of your understanding of sort of. Well, there's Dante and there's Trish, and then there turns out to be Vergil, right? There's just sort of a lot of pastiche there that just sort of gives you a bunch of themes to have rolling around in your head while there's not a lot of actual explicit story.
No, I mean,
it's boy meets girl, boy goes to castle and loses girl, girl betrays boy, girl takes hit for boy and dies, boy kills. Okay, this is getting a little more complicated than I thought. There's some story, but it's pretty loose.
Well, and as an example, what do you have a sense of what Mundus was doing that required Dante to stop Mundus? What was Mundus's motivation?
It seems like every 20 years he comes back to try to take over the world, and previously it was Sparda who defeated him, and now it's Dante, his son, who defeats him.
I see.
But yeah, he's just coming back to take over the world. Apparently, the lore gets a lot deeper as time goes on.
I'm sure you can tell.
People were explaining in the stream. At times, I could not even keep up with it because I was also playing. People are going deep into the lore of, it turns out Mundus did this to become some powerful whatever, and he cheated somehow, of course, because he's Mundus. It's just the thing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's so. Yeah, I mean, playing the rest of the series, I would assume that Mundus comes back, and of course, we know that Vergil makes an appearance and continues to be in the game or in the franchise, and so. Yeah, I mean, I can see the underpinnings of a lore being created in this game for sure.
Yeah,
they just didn't have it probably, all laid out yet. So
right, and obviously, if they had switched gears from it being a Resident Evil game, they probably didn't have tons of time to do that, and they just sort of said, you know what, let's take a light touch, throw in some themes, and hope for the best, and we'll put in some emotional melodrama at the end and a biplane. And really, what more do you need from a story?
Yeah. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the end of Metal Gear Solid, right? With the Jeep.
Right. Is very, very similar to that, except there was no real combat. I mean, you were shooting up the environment, but it was pretty minimal.
Yeah.
So
that was a thing of the era for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Mundus down.
Mundus down, at least for one of us. Let's talk a little bit about I know you had a lot of frustration with the boss, but I think that the structure also, I know at times it worked against me, the mission structure and some of the upgrade stuff, as well as I guess primarily that sort of how you retry, and you have consumables for that, etc., and the other consumables also go away. Let's get into that because I think it's something we've kind of barely touched on, but it's really important to how the play happens. So why don't you give me your impressions as someone who saw a lot more mission over screens?
Yeah. Well, it's the thing that the things that have occurred to me as I was, especially this last session, is sort of the additive nature of the sort of the demoralizing factors in the game. Yeah. And it comes in many forms, and then it ends up adding up. One is an external, which I'll just put to the side, and that being because I'm playing for the podcast, right? There's sort of I'm coming into it with a different mentality, right? It's not necessarily I'm just here for fun specifically, right? We have other goals here, and so that adds some sort of a bit of tension. But then with the structure that Brett's alluding to, you have the additional structure of replaying sections of the game over and over again to get back to the boss because of the retry / sort of like how many lives do you have?
Right.
Sort of the old arcade sort of mentality, which you can buy more quarters via the orb system, but they're still finite. And so if you don't have those, you have to, essentially start from the beginning of the level from the save system, which only saves you there, which structurally is also another weird one because, as Brett was alluding to, the resource management of the game is sort of disconnected from the save and retry system. And so when you save a game, which I tested this out to see what I could do when I started to do a little grinding, when you save the game, you save your state of your upgraded items or your resources or whatever, but you will always start at the beginning of the level until you finish that level. And what's more, when you use one of those retries, things you've consumed stay consumed as well. And so all of these things sort of compound. So every time I die at a boss, because of this structure, not only am I demoralized because I'm and negative, we basically have negative reinforcement here because now I have to run through the level again. But I may have to repurchase things that I haven't purchased yet because I could save at some point, I guess, even, right before the boss or something. And next time I try again, I could, that stuff I wouldn't have to repurchase it. But still you're running through the game or through the level again to get back to where you were. And then with the finite retries, which, as Brett and I were talking about pre-show, a little bit of a mixed blessing on those because in the middle of a battle, when you use a consumable like a vital star or whatever those things are called to get your health replenished, both things in your inventory as well as things in the world are used up. And then when you use one of your retries, those are still used up. They're persistent in that way.
But the boss has now gone back up to full health, for example.
Right.
So you don't get the benefit of having had some success. You only get the negative consequence of having used up some items at that point, whether they're in the world or in your inventory or what have you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's very frustrating.
Well, and as we talked a little bit about, there's technically, because you technically can grind, though it's really not even that efficient or effective to grind. And I found because you just kind of have to replay areas so much to get any amount of orbs, and then also go backwards so much and explore, which is related to another topic of just sort of like the world structure and kind of architectural structure of the world and layout is just not conducive to sort of that kind of exploration and grinding. So you're kind of it's disincentivized to go grind, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I only did it the once, and that was, I guess, the second session. We talked about it on the cast. Yeah. That's the only time I did it. I did grind a bunch there to basically buy one blue orb, maybe a yellow orb, and I think a vital star at that time to get past the horned boss there the first time that you fight one of those. So when it comes out of the wall in the sewer section, and that's it. That's the only time I had occasion or need to grind, but maybe that was enough. That's a pretty good leg up, I guess. Some health. I don't know so much about the retry orbs because by the end of the game I was kind of wishing I just didn't have them. I could just restart because of some of these other issues. Just now I've just, especially in that final battle in space, if I failed early, I'm like, well, now I just want to fail again because who cares at this point? Because I only had basically one one retry orb or something at that point. I'm like, well, okay, so now unless I get through here, that even if I get through here, the thing, I would have to do the next part perfectly as well. So there's some frustrations there for sure.
Yeah, it's just all of those elements I was just trying to list out there quickly just compound. For me, it all compounded together, and added this sort of, like I said, it just demoralized me over time. And I would obviously in times like this, these, like I said, both of us have talked about these. This isn't sort of our go-to genre. It's not our forte as gamers. So I didn't expect to be good at the game. I definitely got better over time, and learned some tricks. I think I got much better at fighting the Vergil Sparda battles because I got the hang of essentially parrying. It's not really a parry, but if you attack when he attacks, you can block him and then put him into a stun. So that, ironically, that fight started out very frustrating over an hour or two, and then I was more confident. So I do love that loop of learning, and we talked a lot about this with all the Dark Souls references and all the Sekiro stuff going on and all that. So that feeling is really gratifying. But with Nightmare specifically as a boss, it's just there's a lot going on. There's a lot of I guess what I'll just sort of lovingly call jankiness with how you interact with that boss from a collision perspective. So it was really hard. And then the camera, there's just a lot of things fighting against me that I just, I wasn't able to really do it, even though I wouldn't even, I don't know if I'd guess, probably over 20 times.
Oh my goodness. I was more, it was like a half dozen, maybe tops. I think more like 3 or 4. Because the first thing that happens is you get sucked through the floor and you have to fight skulls and then Vergil again, or
which you can avoid if you're quick.
If you're quick, I'm not. Yeah. Yes, I never managed to avoid it, but I did, and I would sometimes die down there to Vergil. Especially in that space. Though I got better at using the space to my advantage, because if he had some range, you could hide behind something if he started throwing those blue bolts or whatever at you, blue sort of bombs that would hit you. So I did get better at that. I guess that boss in particular though just didn't get me. For whatever reason.
I don't know.
I was using the sword that Vergil had, the scythe sword thing, which I think does a lot more damage. Maybe you would have had more success switching to the bigger gun, the grenade gun or whatever.
That's one of the only things I didn't. Yeah, I tried different guns. The grenade gun's hard because of the timing of it. But the one thing I didn't try was that sword, because I wanted to use double trigger, and it doesn't have double trigger options,
right.
So
you get the double trigger with it later, but yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I think as part of the Mundus battle. Okay. Now you have double trigger no matter what you use.
Got it. Yeah. So that was kind of frustrating to get a sword
that you don't have all your powers with. So you have been spending money on these powers. It's a weird thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe that's a new game plus thing, or there's some element of that they're expecting you to do. I mean, it definitely, we talked about this before from a structure standpoint. It definitely feels like that, that's what they want you to do, is to go back and perfect and replay these levels. Because when you know what you're doing, they're pretty short,
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Yeah.
In the grand scheme,
I mean, there's several that are short even the first time through. We talked about some of the ship sections and things like that, where it's a couple of minutes, under 5 minutes to do things. Yeah, you definitely see that. I'm sort of curious. I don't think I'll be playing any more of it, but excuse me, I'm curious.
On the New Games Plus thing,
on the New Game Plus, or even just what if I just played it again? Would I be that much better? Would it be more of a breeze for me? At the game's finish, by the way, they do give you a rundown of how you've done, a big scorecard. I had 1 A rank, I had 8 B ranks, I had 10 C's, and only 4 D's. So a respectable GPA.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. I mean, I had a couple. I probably had one A or so, and maybe a couple Bs, but I was mostly Ds, to be honest. And I think one other prediction that I have, though I did buy a couple blue orbs and focused on the extras, kind of basically leveling myself up. I bought a couple purple orbs as well to make my devil trigger amount higher. So it's
I
on
did
for
that as well.
longer.
Yeah.
But I think one of my failings might have been that I was using too many consumables to get through bosses throughout the game. You know what I mean? So my overall red orb intake was much lower by the end because I was really just scraping by.
Right.
And
you were spending it on consumables.
I was spending on consumables, so it's like you don't get a benefit from that, obviously, long term. Right. So I would use like the holy water and stuff like that. So, once I get a boss down to a certain amount, I would pop those things and then do an insta kill just to get through them. And some of those are pretty expensive. So in retrospect, if I maybe focused on putting the time in to just beat them and save those orbs for other things like upgrades and things, maybe it would have been better for me.
Yeah, that's possible because I do feel like I spent a fair number of those orbs on the purple orbs and the blue orbs, just leveling up my health and my devil trigger. I think I had six or seven sigils for the devil trigger. I think it was 6. Yeah, it must have been 6 because the consumable refills 5 of them, and I was always down to 1 after I do an attack. So I had 6. Yeah. And you start with 3, so I must have bought 3 upgrades. Yeah, for that. So
yeah, I mean the to specifically talk about the nightmare, and I won't go into too much detail, but that last nightmare battle that I got stuck on, I think it is a case study in boss design in many ways, in my opinion. And what I mean by that is camera combined with arena, combined with telegraphing, and sort of also clear rule set of the arena, meaning the darkness sort of mechanic that they have that is sort of sometimes hard to know exactly what state it's in. So because there are many times, and then orientation of the boss as well, like sort of, I guess I would kind of categorize that in the animation category. There's so many things fighting each other in that particular battle. And so, for instance, there's a lot of times when, depending on where you are in the arena, because I think there's maybe 2 cameras, maybe 3 cameras, but essentially the camera swaps sort of, half circle. Each half of the circle of that arena has a different camera. And so you're swapping between those. But oftentimes the boss was facing away from the camera for me to where the orb was. And so it's hard. Oh, and then collision as well fights you in there. So, again, I won't get into details, but I have so much to say about that one boss design. Things just, kind of lessons learned, I guess, and things to just watch out for, because there are many times when it's attacking me off camera. These super, because they have a mechanic.
If you can't read those those attacks,
you can't read them, but then they have a mechanic where it forces you to go away from the boss to hit the wall for the darkness mechanic. And that forces you to leave the boss, thus changing the camera, right? And thus making the boss sort of off camera or behind you in certain circumstances. And so, for me, if I do too many of those in a row, I'm taking heavy damage, and some of the attacks, like the freezing one especially, they just wipe you out. So I don't know, part of it could be I just didn't find the rhythm, and maybe I didn't pound on it enough like you did, or I didn't have the right sword or something. But I still think it's an interesting analysis of sort of how those things all fit together, and how it can really make a boss really show its warts. So
yeah, it's funny because for me that was. I mean, I can see now where that would have been an issue. It just turned out not to be for me. So I don't know how that happened. I don't know. Maybe one camera is worse than the other as far as that goes, because I didn't feel like it was a problem for me. So
yeah, there's definitely, it was just because I'd played it so many times, it's definitely kind of a crapshoot. There were definitely times when it was fine. There were playthroughs when it was fine, but ultimately this is just, me not being good enough. Like I'm definitely not blaming the game. I'm more saying that it's an interesting case study, for me, at least, as I was playing it, of things to watch out for.
So you would say that your blood locked you out of the game?
Oh,
that's my segue.
Wow.
To the one other topic that we haven't talked about. Yeah. There's a lot of older. I mean, this is an older game, right? This is 18 years ago, and there are a lot of mechanics that were sort of in vogue at the time. I would definitely say that there's a lot about this game that felt really fresh and new at the time, and I can even see it now.
Sure.
But one thing that's definitely there that you see all over the place, I mean, heck, you see in Zelda games, so it's certainly much older than this, is something that we called at LucasArts, we called blood locking, which is just, you have to kill a certain number of enemies before the door is going to unlock.
Yeah,
quite literally in this case, because they put those sort of texture scrolly skulls and things like that in front of the doors, and once you kill enough dudes, those doors unlock. That's a pretty retro mechanic these days. That's not entirely, though. I feel like the Call of Duty series has leaned on that. You have to make sure you kill a certain number of enemies before you can move on to the next sort of set piece.
Yeah.
So it still happens in games.
It still exists, and is obfuscated, right, in different ways, so you don't really realize it's happening, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, and I appreciate them for fully embracing it in this case, and
clearly telegraphing it.
Yeah,
they exactly tell you when it's over. Oh no, you're done now. You're good.
Yeah, with a camera cut and a framing. Even when you go next to the door, right, that ghostly hand comes out of the door and kind of, I don't know if it grabs you or it's it does damage or not. I don't think I ever got grabbed by one.
It does do damage. It happened to me the very first room in that original hall. There was no combat, but you had to find something. You had to have enough orbs, basically. To unlock the door.
There's a couple of doors you have to use orbs for. Yeah,
right. So you had to have enough orbs to open the door, and if you went up to it and you didn't, it would like grab you and drop you on the ground or something like that, and you take a little damage.
Which is pretty clear.
Yeah. Nope. Gotta figure this out. Can't just come through this. So I that is kind of an old school kind of thing, that yes, we're probably better at hiding these days, but it's definitely still in use. It's good because it's good and bad. It's bad in the sense that it's very gamey, so that you're artificially holding the player back. But that's often in order to teach the player something, or to at least know that player's going to have a certain number of resources when they get to that point. When they get to the next point, I should say, they're going to have fought these things. They're going to have presumably learned skill X, Y, or Z in order to defeat those enemies, etc. So it is kind of a teaching tool, often, as much as it is sort of anything like a gating or extending gameplay, extending time sort of thing. It can be used for those too, and it's probably not as helpful then, but I do feel like when used well, and particularly when it's obfuscated well, you're learning stuff at the right rate and you're getting the right resources out of the combat sessions that you're having, and therefore you're prepared for whatever's coming down the pike, or not in the case of Tim. So who knows?
Well, I'm always mixed on them, and I think the reason that I tend to want to try to avoid them, and some of it is definitely just personal preference, right? There are good, I don't want to say hardcore, but they're good, as Brett said, sort of educating the player, teaching the player reasons to do it, and overcoming those challenges can be good, and it's a forced way to ramp up difficulty over time because you can really control it. But I think I think the downside for me often is just the fact that it is artificially
Yeah.
creating a potential wall moment, right, where you
Right.
have no options other than going through this room, right? And though we've talked about Dark Souls a lot, and I think we both said that neither of us have played a lot of those games. But my understanding is they may have some of that stuff, but there's also a lot of the world structure is such that you can also kind of explore and find alternate routes, and there's shortcutting and things like that are around too. So I don't know how much. Obviously, the audience will have to correct us on that, but I think a good world structure can help alleviate some of that stuff, right? So you more that in a way you create your own blood locks based on what you want to do when you want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is kind of a better way to go about it. And it's harder on the tuning and the balancing to do that. But I just appreciate that more because I'm in a game. I like to, if I'm banging my head against the wall, then I want to maybe try something else for a while.
And
then come back.
I mean, the artificiality is another thing that sometimes just takes me out. Like, wait a minute, why would that door unlock now? That doesn't make any. How is it that these people dying made that door unlock? Games. So it is a thing that I do feel like, if not cleverly hidden, can feel pretty retro and pretty obvious. And
the thing I appreciate about this game is that they just embraced it, and they didn't.
They didn't. You know what? We're not even going to pretend.
and the kind of world and the kind of game that it is, it's for me. This,
I think they can get away with it more here.
Yeah, I was like, okay,
it's a ghostly hand. Sure, okay. Yeah. There's demons. We're fighting demons. So it's okay. That fits in. The right setting can work. So
yeah.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with some pillars, probably just a couple this time, actually, and some feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. We, of course, have come to the end of our original Devil May Cry discussion. And so it's time, as we wrap up, to talk about some takeaways and pillars of this game. This is probably one of the shortest games we've played, actually, now that I think about it. Although for you, I guess it's infinite. But for me, it's one of the shortest games we've played. I feel like I was 5.5 hours or something like that.
Yeah. Well, there's
a lot of retrying, so the actual time is
the
probably double
time
that.
Is not right, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's what my save says. I'm around 5 hours, I think, but that is not. They don't clock. And I'm not playing on.
They don't clock failure.
Well, yeah,
clocks are for closers, Tim.
That's the trick, right? Like I at least have played double that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but technically you're right. Yeah, shortest game. It's kind of a game about sort of perfection or something,
right?
Because of which we'll get into with So what's your first? Which way do you want to go first? What's your first?
We were talking in between here on the break, and one of the things that I think really comes up in researching this game is the happy accidents that allowed this game to be what it is, and it's a thing we kind of mention every now and again, that we suspect a thing is a happy accident, or that just happens. And I feel like in game development, you can really be rewarded, and especially at this time when so much of the sort of AAA continents were as yet unexplored. Still true today, but at the time it felt even more so. You could just sort of catch on to, that's a weird bug, and we were making this Resident Evil thing, but now I guess we're not gonna, because we're pulling away from that, and just going with that flow and taking where your developer's heart takes you. Mm-hmm. It's not something we normally talk about, just because we don't often have a lot of visibility into that end of things, and so it's hard to see it as a takeaway because we don't really know. But in this case, we actually do know that one of your takeaways, in fact, or part of it, is it came out of a bug that somebody saw and said, "Oh, that's pretty cool." maybe we could do that, or the whole, hey, this is becoming its own thing separate from Resident Evil. Why don't you push it even further? Originally, the character being sort of a bland Tony, moving to this flamboyant Dante, and just sort of rolling with those punches to come up with something new and fresh feels like an important thing to keep in mind. We tend, especially as we've talked about the industry becoming more and more risk averse over time, it's a good reminder that sometimes you just got to keep your eyes open for the opportunities that the gods of development lay in front of you. And in the history of this game, I think they caught a few lucky breaks. So yeah, that's my sort of weird first takeaway.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, for me to drill down into, like kind of riffing off of that, as Brett was alluding to, the bug, and you're alluding to the
juggling,
that originally came from
Onimusha. It was a bug in Onimusha.
Yeah. So, yeah, and the way I was trying to sort of clumsily summarize it in a sentence for this takeaway is really just the game's ultra focus for a third person action game, which again we talked about some 2D side scrolling lineage with some of these mechanics, but for this kind of game, its bread and butter was high skill, high speed, mechanical, sort of combo based melee, skill based combat. And just leaning into that speed and to the juggling point, the way that the combos work, not all the way to a fighting game, but you can see some of that coming through when you get in. And again, I didn't get great at the bosses, but when it came to using things like the juggling and sort of the combos, and it's really gratifying to have like just a minor enemy essentially never hit the ground before dying from my hits, or juggling it and then slamming down on the last hit to be the killing blow. And so that sort of group fight, whenever there were a lot of sort of those minor enemies, was really fun and can get very technical. And that was such, the bread and butter of this game, and such like an orthogonal shift from the Resident Evils that Capcom was doing. It became ingrained in its identity and has become sort of known, right? Devil May Cry as the game that introduced us to, at least in this context, introduced us to that sort of juggling / melee combat combo sort of situation in a game like this, and definitely was riffed off of from here on out. And we mentioned God of War as an example, which is sort of a weird sort of branch on the tree, right? Not exactly the same, and they definitely made different choices, but you definitely can see some of it in here as a later game being influenced. And then and this was at a time when other games with third-person cameras were coming out and trying different things, right? As we've played some of those. So it's a really interesting sort of comparison, time of comparison with all that stuff. But the thing that this one had from a takeaway perspective was that highly skill-based, timing-based, telegraphing-based melee combat. Yeah, so that's my
absolutely. And the more you're able to read it, and I mean, I think this is at the very beginning of the PS2 life cycle, and there's also sort of that element of right place, right time for that, because I think preceding generations there wasn't maybe quite enough fidelity to necessarily read all of that stuff. We talked a little bit about that even with Kingdom Hearts, that sometimes you can't quite get that from the animations, exactly what's going to happen next. And so those mechanics are a little bit harder to execute on in the action RPG frame of mind. But yeah, this one definitely it's leaning right into that and trying to really develop that into its own sort of thing. I guess my second one, I have a second one that's positive and then one that's maybe more on the negative. My second positive one is that your sort of incidental aesthetics can really define you. And what I'm talking about is the cool factor. The way that this game leans into at least the coolness through a Japanese lens of these characters, and the flashy garb, the flamboyance, the flair with which Dante is executing all of this stuff. It's not grim. It's playful, even when he's meeting these, as you've remarked, he's meeting these bosses, and is just kind of like, yeah, come on, what do you got? And is kind of insouciant as he tackles those things, and that I think just lends it that sort of cool remove that also is very much a part of the series, and makes it stand out. Had this been a lot more grim, I don't even if it had been essentially the same game, I don't know that it would have quite connected as well as it did. So, for sure, one of the things I take away from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's characterization is so. I mean, I don't know if it went as far as people, giving using the Devil May Cry feel or Devil May Cry look as a descriptor, but I feel like it sort of did.
Yeah.
People would even say like, "Oh yeah, that's very Devil May Cry," and it kind of just became an understanding of what that meant, because it was that bravado or what have you, melodrama and bravado and operatic almost, right? But just like,
and
like
I
said,
think you
cool.
see it in others too, like Suda 51, for example, is somebody else who comes to mind who has this kind of same sort of swagger, even if his is a little more off kilter. He's also sort of, his works tend to be similarly swaggering, and I feel like that really counts for a lot, and I do tend actually to enjoy his games even more so. They're very there's the off kilter part of it really appeals to me as well. So, but that feels of a piece with these games, his sort of later games than this. So, yeah.
Yep.
I think another one you wanted to hit?
Well, this is maybe more of a small one, but I think it's actually maybe a bridge between your last one and my other one, and that's sort of like a I guess I'll call it a gamification of gamification of celebrating your successes or ranking your successes. Because of the style that you're talking about and the cool factor, but also with the sort of more highly technical combat, and sort of the gaminess of the game in general. We mentioned bloodlocks. We mentioned just sort of the presentation. Every combat you have is graded and ranked, and then the level itself, the mission itself, is also ranked. And so there's this constant feedback you're getting of, are you doing a good job at this fairly technical combat game? And so it sort of encourages you. There's other games who've always had, or even since have had technical sort of rewards based on how well you do, but this one really puts it right front and center, right? And you see the words popping up over the combat over your head saying how well you're doing, and it's even in real time. So it's like as you get better and you're hitting this one enemy over and over again, the words are getting better, right? And then that sort of virtuous loop is happening where you feel like that positive reinforcement, and then you're rewarded with more orbs at the end. So I believe, right, the better you do,
yes, that's right. You get a bigger bonus the higher your ranking on the level. So also from the enemies, I believe they drop more if you get up to stylish, for example.
Yeah. So that sort of, with the mission structure and sort of like all of those things are all intertwined, but that definitely was a wrapper, if you will, for the game in many ways, where they were just going to constantly rank you, and for better or for worse, if you're getting D's all the time, then maybe that's not as fun for you to see that, but it does encourage you to get better. So
no, it's an important part of the experience, for sure. And I think you're right, it does tie in both to sort of my point and your point in that way. Because they of course the top one is stylish.
Yeah,
So,
right.
right. So
Exactly.
cool and bravo, instead of just being DCBAS, something they might have borrowed from racing games or something. They actually explicitly say what those mean, and they're except for dull, they're all kind of cool. So yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
All right, I had one more, and this was the sort of more negative one. Briefly stated, I guess, and it's usually coming from you, is your camera must work with your levels must work with your camera.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like we've said, this is the era where we're figuring these things out. So that's a thing that we figured out, or at least we're continuing to figure out. I think we do a lot better these days. But there are definitely times where you're fighting it here.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, and in this case, it actually includes the controls, as you point out, when you change from camera and now your brain is like, well, I'm pushing in this direction, but it's still going in that direction. But as soon as I let go of the stick, it's going to move. I'm going to have to switch that. It's a reasonable solution to that problem. Better not to have that problem at all. So you really got to sort of think those things through.
It's an interesting convergence of a lot of different things happening in the industry at one time. Because it's trying to do multiple things at once, both from the Resident Evil legacy as well as action games, as well as boss design. I mean, to your takeaway there, I would add in also enemy design, right? Like camera, level design, enemy design, animation design, like all of that stuff is really, especially in the bosses, because this is such a boss centric game. All those have to work together really well, and they're trying and experimenting with so many things at once. It's bound to break. But you got to applaud them for trying all the stuff in one game. At a time when there really wasn't a blueprint for any of it.
They're figuring their way. I mean, I think that's maybe they only needed one or two more happy accidents, to be honest, to get it all the way there. So interesting game. Very very weird. Not what I maybe fully expected, and bummed I didn't finish. But I got to call a spade a spade. I just gotta move on with my life. You do. It happens.
It happens.
It happens to the best of us, and to you.
Okay. Well done. Well done.
Thank you. Okay. Speaking of moving on, we've been gathering reviews and emails and stuff. I guess we recorded late last weekend, so we didn't get to quite as many of those that we normally do.
Yeah.
So we have a couple reviews this week and a handful of emails. Let's try to get through all of those. It'd be great to catch up a little bit before we turn to our bonus episode chat. You have the first one.
Okay, first review. Awesome insight into video games as art, engineering, and culture from The Century 42. This is a fantastic podcast. Tim and Brett give incredible insight into the video game industry, creation, art, technical aspects, and the culture around it all. I appreciate how down to earth they are and their patience with making their points clear and meaningful for their audience. They have a real care and enthusiasm for video games and the people who both make and play them. I love how they use this podcast as a way of improving, challenging, and developing their own craft and helping others. I give Tim and Brett 6 out of 5 stars. They and their content rock. I give the technical sound aspects of the podcast 4.5 out of 5. Small criticism: their sound levels need more care, attention, and adjustments. The sound can go way up and then way down within seconds, whether you are listening over headphones or car speakers. Usually, one/both is talking very soft, and then one person will raise their voice to emphasize a point, and it is no bueno on the ears. Be ready to have your hand on those volume controls to both hear and protect your ears, those eardrums. Probably also has something to do with how low they talk, or how they talk very differently.
Yeah.
Might just be a tough thing to fix. Each episode is still worth it. Plus, it might not bother others. So this podcast still deserves 5 stars and a listen from anyone even slightly interested in games. Thank you for the good, honest feedback there.
Yes. So based on that feedback, which we also got as part of an email, I'm pretty sure it's the same person. I added a new step into my process, which uses another service to level the podcast better. And I've had a lot of good feedback. I did a poll on Twitter last week. It was a small sample size, but it was all positive. So that's good. Nobody said it sounded worse, and only one person said it sounded the same to them. So most people heard an improvement. And I did have some feedback on the stream as well. So I'm adding that into the process. It hasn't significantly changed the time it takes me to put the thing together, but the resulting audio is a lot more is leveled basically all at the same volume throughout. So I think we're getting there. I brought that up. I left that in purely so I could say this is the kind of feedback I need to hear, because I won't. Yeah. I don't normally listen to the podcast a third time, right? I live it once when we record it. Then I listen to it a second time and do the show notes and mix it. But I just kind of spot check usually just to make sure, okay, I didn't mess something up. But okay, yeah, it looks like it's all there. And I'm using mostly free tools, Audacity or what have you. But I did find a service that I can use online that will just take my uncompressed MP3 and level it really well. And it seems like that's going to work out. So I would not have known and would not have gone looking for it without the feedback. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, Brett, obviously, as everyone knows, Brett does all the work. But we, from a microphone perspective,
I even finished the games.
And you even finished the games. Well done. Yes. I'll never hear the end of that one. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the sort of talking loud, talking soft thing. Yeah, I mean, probably there's some techniques that we're not pros, we're not professionals at this. So I think we definitely can keep that in mind. And I'll definitely do better, because I'm a soft talker. But then I get excited sometimes about stuff. The other piece of feedback I've heard anecdotally sometimes is that we sometimes get out of sync, or talk over each other. And I don't know if that's the two files getting out of sync or not. As another
sometimes they don't line up exactly, so it can be tricky.
And sometimes it's hard for each of us, because we're not sitting next to each other, to know when to start talking and when to stop talking. So that it could just be that. But as another anecdote, not to do this live on the podcast, but have you ever noticed Waypoint Radio after they finish, they have their sort of outtakes, and
they do this claps things.
Yeah. What is that? That's obviously a syncing up technique they use, but they're doing it based on some sort of universal clock.
They use some timed clock on. Yeah. I think I just need to be more careful sometimes with how I line up a track. And I think sometimes I just don't notice until very late. And then I'm like, and then I'm trying to do the little spot fixes, and it gets very difficult.
Oh, okay.
So generally it's not a huge problem, but there have been episodes where I've gotten late in it and gone, we're out of sync now. And at that point I'm like, and I need to get this out in a half an hour, because I got to go to work. Yeah. And so it just kind of ends up being a thing. So
I was curious if there was something like that, but their Waypoint is syncing up to at least 3 different locations, so they might need to do it differently. So okay, thanks for the feedback.
All right.
And thanks Brett, for adding in that step.
Yes, I hope that everyone enjoys that. It's fairly inexpensive, so not a big deal. Okay, here's one subject. This is another review as well, and both of these are through the iTunes Apple Store podcast app type review system. Great way to help us reach new listeners. This one, the subject is appreciate the insight, and it's from Caffeinated Brushes. My favorite kind of brushes. I have loved video games my whole life. I enjoy listening to tales of game development, problems that developers face, how things have changed from one generation of games to the next, and the pillars that make up the design of each game, whether that game is a success or a failure. think because of this podcast, among some others, a new generation could make some really awesome new games in the next 20 years, even without loot boxes. So there's one with a little bit of a game development spin there at the end from Caffeinated Brushes. There will be no loot boxes in my next game. I'm just gonna go ahead. I'm gonna put that out there now. That's as far as I know, anyway. Unless my next game changes to be a different game entirely, I end up having to work for somebody else.
Podcast.
There'll be no loot boxes in the podcast. That much, at least, I can commit to.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for that. First mail.
Yeah, let's send the first mail to devgameclub@gmail.com.
Subject is DMC animation and gameplay from Josh Rogers. Hey guys, I was curious about y'all's thoughts on gameplay feedback through the animation in Devil May Cry. I remember being a kid and playing this game for the first time. I never played a 3D action game that moved this fast and had so many little details that communicated so much style. The way you hover over the ground when firing weapons. We didn't even talk about that too much. The blurs behind certain sword swipes and movement, the bright red jacket rolling and swiping through the air. You get the idea. But my question is how all of these little details in style and nuance of speedy animation how are all of these little details in style and nuance of speed animation used in communicating a lot? I butchered that. What does it do good and not good at communicating through animation? How does it all impact gameplay and player perception? I'm not even positive how to word my question, but hopefully you'll understand what I mean. You talked a lot about the style ranking system and the style in the cutscene and story, but what about the actual gameplay style? Thanks for the great insight every week and all of the extra work y'all put into this podcast on top of your full-time jobs. Y'all rock. Thanks, Josh Rogers, Athens, Georgia.
Yes. I thought about this one a little bit. We were going to do it last week, and I'm glad we didn't because I had more time to think on it. And there's a couple things going on here. One is the animation here at least began as motion capture. Obviously, they couldn't motion capture people flying through the air or anything like that. But I think that there's a weightedness that happens from a lot of these little details that really help communicate where a body is going to move. And that helps you read the tells, and also helps you know when it makes the most sense to continue your attack. So I think it contributes to understanding the rhythm of your own movement, or of Dante's movement, I should say. I'm not an animator, obviously, and I'm not actually particularly well versed in it, but those are a couple of things that come to mind. And as far as the physics of the sort of cloak or what have you, I think that just adds on top of that, because now you can tell which direction his weight is going, because the cloak will lag a little bit, so you sort of have a sense of that eddying movement that his body will have. Those are a couple things I thought about. Last week I had no idea, so I'm glad we waited.
Well, this is an excellent point. We didn't really call it out specifically as much as we probably should have when we're talking about all of the style and the communication to the player. I will admit and apologize that most likely whenever I'm talking about telegraphing, the key thing that I'm talking about is usually animation in the game, in the case of this game. So I probably said telegraphing a lot and probably could have been more specific that I'm really talking about animation, because they have some effects and some audio telegraphing going on, but most of the time you're looking at the animation for things to get the understanding of how, basically how you're going to act and what you're doing and how you want to react as well. So it's key. Yeah. I think you've appropriately summarized its importance from your childhood, remembering that, those sword swipes and the movement and all of that stuff, because the animation cycling that's going on is actually key to your button presses. And so using juggling as an example, and some of the sort of basic stuff that you get from the core mechanics, the animation is actually telling you when to press the button next. You can definitely spam and have some success. But once I started being a little more patient and watching the animations, and of course we always bring up the Dark Soulses of the world, but animation is a key variable there too, because it even tells you when you have some when your state changes, like invulnerability and things like that for roles and stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's this is the beginning. This game, from a third person action perspective, this game, it's similar to sort of frame counting in fighting games, right, where people were doing the same thing, and they're really talking about what part of the animation is happening when, and that's when you know what you need to do. So
right. And even if you're not picking up on it directly, I think you do pick up on it subliminally to a degree.
Yeah,
or
the best,
that
I
is
think the best ones.
Yeah,
I think the best ones do it that way. Yeah, where you don't even realize it. Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. This is good call out.
That's a good question. Yeah, for sure. And glad we got to dig into it a little bit more closely, specifically. I've got one here from James King where the subject is DMC nostalgia. Hey guys, love the pod. Been listening since the Warcraft episodes. One of my all-time favorite games, just behind Command and Conquer. So glad you guys are doing DMC. I took a trip to Korea to visit some family when I was 13, and my cousin brought over his PS2. The game of his choosing was DMC. We bonded over many hours playing that game for the next few months. The language barrier between us was taken down with this game, and it was great to share something with him. The game was in English with Korean subtitles, so we both knew what was going on. To this day, I don't forget how much fun we had with each other alternating each level. Two kids who didn't speak each other's language would be rooting each other on to get those S ranks. When I got back from the trip that next day, I went to the store to buy a PS2 and Devil May Cry. Used up all the money I'd saved to that point and couldn't be happier. Keep up the great work, guys, and thanks for the entertainment over the years. I love to hear about video games bringing people together. So we occasionally get these nice little bits of nostalgia where somebody will talk about, I played this with my brother or my a friend or what have you, and they're always nice little windows into how people actually enjoy games out there in the world.
Yeah, that's a great story, especially the language barrier side, which is like a cool, interesting spin in there that adds a little extra something that is really cool. There's I think a pretty infamous. Did you ever see that Don Daglow talk that he did where he talks about this? I think it was a grandfather and a granddaughter, maybe. Anyway, there's sort of an infamous example of sort of like, games bringing people together that, brings a tear to your eye every time. So if you like those kinds of stories, look up one from Don Daglow. I think it's out there. It's pretty famous one.
Cool. Yeah, no, I don't think I know that, so I'll have to track it down. If I find something, it'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, I think it's one of his famous talk about like the 10 lessons learned over 30 years of development or something, because he's been around forever.
I have that.
So, and he tells a story in that one. He's actually done it at a couple different anyway, just every time I think of games bringing people together, that story pops into my head for some reason. So it's a good talk.
All right.
So next email.
Yes, you have one more and I have one more.
Okay. Subject is appropriation is not inherently bad, from Esther Olson. Dear Brett and Tim, I'd like to say something on the subject of Japanese appropriation of American and European cultures, which has been mentioned on the show in the last couple of episodes. Every time I see the word appropriation being used, it's when someone has done something crappy. So I could see how someone may think appropriation of other cultures is always bad. However, appropriation in and of itself is not inherently hurtful. Whether it's hurtful or not depends on the context. Basically, it comes back to the concept of punching up or versus punching down. For example, when Americans appropriate Japanese culture, it reinforces racist norms. On the other hand, when Japanese people build an interpretation of Paris or whatever it was, well, the French don't exactly have a long history of being oppressed based on their French ethnicity. Without having seen Japanese Paris, I'll hazard a guess that it's harmless. Regards, Esther. I think in that case it was China was the
It was
one.
China,
Yeah. But I
that seemed
get the
neither.
point. Yeah.
Same point applies, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure we were necessarily ourselves saying that all appropriation is bad, but it's a well taken point that often that is what people say. It's something that Tim and I, with our positions of privilege, probably need to be more sensitive of than others,
Yeah.
and to be careful of. There was a great talk at GDC a year or two ago, maybe a little bit further back than that, in the last couple of years. The gentleman who made Donut County was trying so hard to make that game a game about a particular Native American culture, and he contacted the tribe, and they didn't really want to be involved or have anything to do with it, and they wanted him not to do it, and he kept trying to find a way, and that's sort of one of those lessons he felt like he had to learn, of like, this is just not my story. Why do I keep trying to tell it? And so that is kind of often the negative side, but it's definitely true that it doesn't have to be negative. And I do wonder, I mean, Japan's culture being so historically insular and imperial, like there's a whole different kind of, historically speaking, I'm not sure really how to think of it. I mean, that's why I've mostly looked to others to kind of give me information about this, because it's not something I have a lot of insight into. I just don't really know. And so that's why I've just we brought it up and brought up feedback that we heard and getting some more here. So, but yeah, point taken.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right.
And final one is subject camera comments from Zimmy Finger. We hear from time to time. Oh, Esther, we do as well. So hello, Esther. Hey, Tim and Brett. This game has been kicking my butt. Anyway, I revisited the first level, specifically the castle entrance part. My theory is game cameras have to show where the player is and where the player could be. So when walking toward a door, if the camera changes midway, I think this creates a video game version of a jump cut. I know I'm fighting a losing battle here, but I actually really appreciate the stylized shots, and I feel like it can work. It can make sense, but I get the impression that Tim and maybe Brett would disagree, which leads to my question: do either of you have a preferred camera style? Thank you guys for taking the time to read listener questions, by the way. It means a lot. Well, we like to have them, so keep bringing them. Do you have a preferred camera style, sir?
Well, let's see. I do. Before I answer that, though, the one thing I'll say for Zimmy, I agree with him that stylized cameras and fixed cameras like this can work. They definitely can. I just think this particular game, they weren't in the business yet of refining them or perfecting them, because there's definitely modern games that are doing a very similar thing. They just have found some different ways to go about it. One that comes to mind that wasn't perfect and is not an action game per se, but I believe we talked a lot about it, was when we played the game, was Eco. And that is very much what's that?
That immediately came to mind for me as well.
Yeah, I think that's a master class in what Zimmy's talking about, where you want to give the right framing of the player and the right framing of the options the player has or the character has. And that could be the destination you could go. It could be gameplay options. It could be various things. And people got better and better at it. And they, like we said earlier in this episode, they were experimenting here. So I definitely appreciate dynamic and dramatic cameras. I love it when it's done right. It's just, I think they did two things. One, they didn't refine the cameras enough in many particular areas for achieving that goal. They probably had too many cameras per area. And then also they put combat, which had some dynamic AI elements to it, within the same rooms with the same cameras, which then would fight each other. So they made it harder on themselves than they probably needed to be. But as far as my favorite, this is going to sound like a cop out, but My favorite camera is actually first person.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
I just love the immersion of first person for some reason. I don't know if it's just the thing that I grew up playing, or I play everything, lots of things with different cameras. But if I had to choose, I probably would go there. What about you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I actually really like third person cameras because I like to see the character often.
Mm-hmm.
I think but it has to be. Uh, I really appreciate when that camera is thought through to preserve being cinematic. And so I'll give you an example of what I mean. Recently, I was playing Alpha Protocol on the stream on weeknights, and they would have these cutscenes where I'm talking basically to a person on a screen. And my camera at that point should move and reframe the scene in such a way that it's more dramatic. And having me still be basically in the center of the screen means that the sort of other person in the scene can never be sort of equally important and dramatic. So there's this rule of thirds in filming conversations where it's like, well, you want basically the space between people to be sort of in the middle of the frame, and not just one or the other of the people. And when it's always one of those, it really drives me crazy. So it's things like that drive me up a wall. But I think just to pick a great third person camera from something we played last year was we played a bit of God of War, and I thought that camera was pretty phenomenal almost all of the time.
Yeah.
And managed to encapsulate some of those rules as well, and always be able to see the things that you felt like you needed to see, and be a close third person camera that I generally kind of like. So
Yeah.
I would pick that a really kind of great camera design.
Yeah. They stayed consistent. They stuck to their guns and chose a way that they were going to do it. And as we talked about in this episode and probably throughout the God of War series, the level design and camera, for the most part, tried to work together really well the whole time because of the choices that they were making on their camera being what it was, basically scripted camera. So yeah. Yep.
All right.
Good
Well,
topic.
we're all caught up. Yeah, it is a great topic, and something we talk about often. But it's true. I don't think we ever say this is our favorite. I like a first-person game too, but I don't know. There's something about the stories that third person is more easily lent to tell is something that really appeals to me, because it's clearly a different character and not just a stand-in for you, or not always just a stand-in for you. Sometimes the third-person character still is, so it depends. But yeah, I guess that's why I appreciate them, even though they're more difficult. So, all right, sir. Why don't you let folks know what we're going to do next?
Yeah, we're going to do one of the reasons we chose to do Devil May Cry on the podcast for this series at this time is because of a recent release of Devil May Cry 5. So as a bonus episode, we are going to play some Devil May Cry 5 to see how the series has leapt forward, or whatever direction it leapt. We don't know yet, I guess.
Yeah.
I assume it's forward. And so it'll be interesting to definitely play, having gone through the trials and tribulations of this game for myself. I'm looking forward to see some modernization of it, because there's definitely a lot to improve upon from this game. But so we're going to play some of that. For the bonus episode, we usually just kind of play a couple hours, right? We didn't really pick a place to stop, but
no, we don't shoot to play the same amount or up to the same place, and sometimes these are games that we want to continue with, or at least I want to continue with. So the bonus episodes for me are it's been fun to play this game and be introduced to this series. And I'm wondering if Devil May Cry might be 5 might be that sort of sweet spot for me, where I'm like, oh, actually, this is refined to a level where I can really, really enjoy it, or for me. So then I think this original one really was, though I did, I did, as I mentioned, finish it. So
yes, I think you mentioned that.
I think that might have come up.
That. Yeah, that one time.
Yeah, just that one time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, so that's what we'll be doing next time. In the meantime, you can, of course, as I mentioned earlier, shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com or give us one of those reviews. Those do really help us reach new listeners. And, of course, you can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Lately, I've been continuing to stream most nights, and then on the weekends, I play whatever we're playing. So this coming weekend, that'll be Devil May Cry 5. You can find me at twitch.tv/Brett Duville, no underscore there. And you can see me weeknights right now playing Jak and Daxter, the original, via remaster on PlayStation 3. So I've been diving back into that game, which is a game I loved back in the day. So come by. We have a small but warm group, and I enjoy playing and chatting with them, either whether it's on the weekends or weeknights. So, all right, sir. Well, that's about all for us this week. Have fun playing games, and we'll see you next week. Good night.
Good night.
Should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light.